Our final speaker of the day is Annette Adeoyobo with her speech entitled Eloquent Thunder, Barbara Jordan and the Architecture of Justice.
If the walls of the Texas state capitol could talk, they would echo with Barbara Jordan's deep, commanding presence. A voice that made history and proved that when spoken with conviction, justice can shake even the marble pillars of power. It was 1966, and Texas politics was still more dusty boots than diversity. And into that stubborn world stepped a woman who didn't just make history, she shook its very core. Barbara Jordan, born in Houston's 5th Ward, became the first African American elected to the Texas Senate after Reconstruction. Later, she became the first Southern Black woman elected to the United States Congress. Now, before we embark on her journey to Washington, we must begin in Houston. On the porch, young Jordan, knees clutched, drawn to the radio. Not for music, but for the magic of the words that lit her young heart. One day, hearing Edith Sampson, one of the first Black women to argue before the U.S. Supreme Court, Barbara felt a lightning strike. She would become a lawyer. Now this was a wild and defiant dream for a young Black girl in segregated Texas. But Barbara Jordan was never one to turn down a bold dream. In 1956, she graduated from Texas Southern University, magna cum laude. Then she headed east to Boston University School of Law, where she was one of only 2 women in her entire class. She returned home to Houston in 1959 and opened up her law practice in her parents' home, using their dining room table as their primary workspace. And to supplement her income, she worked as an administrative assistant to County Judge Bill Elliott. Now, one might say that politics was in the air, or in the dust. Houston in the 1960s was changing fast. Civil rights marches, sit-ins, shifting power. Barbara Jordan realized that in order to change the law, she needed to make the law. So she ran for the Texas House of Representatives in 1962 and 1964, but lost both times. But here's the thing about Barbara Jordan. She never saw defeat as failure. In fact, each loss lit a fiercer fire inside of her. So in 1966, she ran again, this time for the Texas Senate. And she won. And when she took the oath of office in 1967, she stood in the very chamber that had once voted to secede from the Union and that had written Jim Crow into the state's DNA. She stood there as a Black woman from Houston's 5th Ward, ready to legislate. And in that chamber, she quickly proved her genius for building coalitions. She didn't storm down the doors of power. She opened them with logic, patience, and grace. In 1972, she became the first Black woman to preside over the Texas Senate. She co-sponsored or sponsored nearly 70 bills during her tenure, including legislation on minimum wage, anti-discrimination, and fair employment. And then came her call to Washington. In 1972, after Houston's 18th district became newly redistricted, Barbara Jordan ran for Congress and won. Now, this victory was more than symbolic. It was a sign that Texas was changing. And once in Congress, she did what few freshmen would ever do. She defined the moral tone of the institution. Her moment came in the summer of 1974 during the House Judiciary Committee hearings on the impeachment of President Richard Nixon. The country was weary, wounded by Watergate, and divided. But Barbara Jordan, seated in front of the committee with papers neatly in hand, began to speak. And I quote, "My faith in the Constitution is whole. It is complete. It is total. And I refuse to be an idle spectator to the diminution, the subversion, the destruction of the Constitution." Those words, that voice, rolled through America like thunder. Eloquent thunder. And suddenly, the daughter of a Baptist minister became the nation's conscience. She didn't attack or grandstand. Instead, she reminded people what the law and justice sounded like. Those words surged through living rooms, shaking hearts, and she reminded the nation that the laws and justice were sacred trusts, not tools for convenience. And I quote, "We, the people." It is an eloquent beginning. But when that document was completed on the 17th of September, 1787, I was not included in that. But through the process of amendment, interpretation, and court decision, I have finally been included in We, the People. After the dramatic Watergate hearings, Barbara Jordan turned her attention to ethics reform, voting rights, and social justice, which included expanding workers' compensation and bolstering the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to include coverage of Mexican Americans. Most notably, Barbara Jordan delivered a historic keynote address at the 1976 Democratic National Convention as the first African American and woman to do so. Her eloquent thunder emphasized American ideals, unity, equality, and accountability that rallied notable support for the successful presidential campaign of Jimmy Carter. Barbara's health began to fail in the 1980s. Multiple sclerosis confined her to a wheelchair, but her spirit only grew stronger. She worked with some of the most powerful leaders in American government, including as the chairwoman of the United States Commission on Immigration Reform under President Bill Clinton, and as the ethics advisor to Governor Ann Richards. She became a professor at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas, mentoring and paving the way for the next generation of leaders, including myself. Barbara Jordan passed away in 1996 from pneumonia and leukemia. She became the first Black woman to be buried in the Texas State Cemetery, the same resting grounds as Stephen F. Austin, Sam Houston, and other giants. This was a fitting honor, for Barbara Jordan was a giant who moved a nation. Texas history is filled with outlaws and lawmakers, with agents of chaos and architects of justice. Barbara Jordan was the rare soul who knew that true power doesn't come from bending the rules or breaking them to your will. True power comes from believing that justice, real, equal, constitutional justice, is worth protecting, even when it is unpopular. She built her legacy not on fiery rebellion, but on unshakable integrity. She didn't just speak truth to power, she embodied it. So today, As we look back on Barbara Jordan, we are reminded that the architects of justice aren't always the loudest or the boldest. Sometimes they are those who refuse to sit idle while the Constitution trembles. And that was the kind of Texan that Barbara Jordan was. One who taught that the law, when used rightly, can be the most powerful voice in the room. In the story of Texas, a state of lawmen and lawbreakers, Barbara Jordan stands as the voice that never wavered, the conscience that never cracked, the architect who built her justice on one word, one law, and one courageous act at a time. So to close in the words of former President Bill Clinton, as Barbara Jordan was to be laid to rest, she left a vivid air signed in her honor. We the people will miss you. We thank you, and God speed. Thank you.